This is TWiT.
All right, so the book, Tripps Mickle writes for the New York Times. He's written for many different places, as I remember, right?
Yeah, he was a Wall Street Journal for a long
time. A long-time journal guy. And he covers Apple. He covers Google. He was the longtime journal reporter on Apple. Before that, alcohol and tobacco.
Yes.
Good reporter. He has a new book. Show us the book. What's it called?
After Steve, How Apple became $1 trillion company but lost its soul.
Oh.
That's like the YouTube title, though. That's really like the YouTube title.
That gives you some idea of where they're going in there. All I've read is the excerpt the Times published, why Jony Ive left Apple.
Yes.
Tell us about that. He was not happy, it turns out. It wasn't mutually amicable
I have to
party.
preface this by saying that the issue I have with a lot of mainstream publications when it comes to Apple is exactly like, this is why I was trepidatious that Tripp was writing it. He's a fabulous reporter, excellent writer, excellent writer, but the journal will do something like take a tobacco reporter, throw him on the Apple beat and say, go cover them.
Right.
And Apple's like, it's like the same problem with Lego and IKEA. They're just not normal companies, and they end up getting covered by the journal and by a bunch of other publications like their IBM. You know, like there's no understanding of Apple there, so the narrative is always wrong. It's like the facts are correct, and this is how IBM would act under that situation, but it's not at all the way Apple's going to act.
That's an interesting premise, though. Do you really think Apple is that different from any other company? How?
Yeah. I think the way that they were structured from Steve and the way that Tim has continued to implement things is they don't make the same kinds of decisions for the same kinds of reasons. They're also much more like, they're very, I know this sounds ridiculous, but they're very what you see is what you get. Like Tim is very, very Tim. And a lot of companies aren't. They're very bureaucratic and they're very hidden and they have all these different shareholder things that they're like
You
agendas.
don't want to interview CEOs because they have talking points and they never deviate and they're really not honest, really, frankly.
And Apple thinks long term. Like a lot of companies also, especially in our generation, are very immediately focused, where Apple does have a history of doing a lot of very long game things, like things that don't make sense in the short term, but really do pay off. Like there's a lot of ways they could extract a lot more money, right? They could put t-shirts up on Apple.com. They sell billions of dollars worth of t-shirts on Apple.com, but they just don't do it. And that's very different than the way a lot of other businesses are, like IKEA and like Lego. I mean, they're outlier businesses.
Okay. So do you feel like Tripp does not understand that?
I think in his reporting, I always felt that. Like he always had a good amount of facts, but I didn't think he came to the right conclusion. I don't think that we can get into whether there are narratives that the Wall Street Journal and the Times editors impose on this stuff. That's probably an element of it. But I think he did get a really good understanding of Apple. Maybe not all the people involved, but I think he does. He comes off understanding Apple way better in this book, and I think it's much to his credit that all these interviews gave him all that insight. Some of the stories he tells, I know some of the people involved, and they didn't happen exactly the way that they happened in the book. So I think the people who were inclined to talk to him are the people who weren't that happy with Tim Cook or Jony Ive.
Right.
And that might explain why some of the why it's like, yeah, this happened, but that's not the vibe, at all that happened. It's like, because like any business, you've got to make choices, you've got to make compromises, you've got to make trade-offs, and the people who don't get their way are generally upset. And I get a lot of the vibe from like the upset people got to talk a lot for this book.
He says 200 interviews with current and former Apple employees and advisors, a compendious review of public sources. Neither Ive nor Cook agreed to speak to the author for attribution. That's interesting, for attribution. But the story that's told in the excerpt in the Times is that Jony Ive was increasingly unhappy with after Steve died, with the bureaucratic nature. He said the accountants are running the show, and became more and more disengaged to the point where at one point all of the designers were gathered together to show him new designs for the iPhone. He arrived 3 hours late without apology, looked at them, made some notes, and then wandered off and never made any choices.
At the battery. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the whole overall motif of the book is that Tim Cook is like an absentee father for Jony, where Steve was like always there for him, always visiting him, always editing things, giving feedback. And Tim did not want to be Steve, knew he couldn't be Steve, and so left Jony almost entirely alone, which is what he did with most of the executives. He trusted them to run their business, and Jony didn't have anybody like Steve to work with after having somebody like that. And at the same time, Tim didn't have Steve, so in their attempts to scale the company, Jony, I guess, feels sort of quasi-abandoned, and Tim feels like, okay, you want to make a goal, like Johnny's excesses weren't curtailed. So all Tim sees is like gold watches, massive tents, cars that have like living rooms and no steering wheels. And he feels like some order needs to be imposed on this. And then Jony feels like he's not being protected and nurtured the way he was under Steve, even though Steve was very good at pruning him. So you have like, just like there was a missing ingredient. And how could there not be? Because Steve was gone.
Well, and I think, Jony Ive wasn't 100% successful either. I mean, I by the way, I totally agree with the living room without a steering wheel. I think that is the future. But just to put on the record. But
he wanted to ship it in 2019, Alex.
Well, yeah, I would have bought one in 2019. Anyway, so but what I would say is, the keys on the laptop didn't turn out too well. There was a whole bunch of things that were becoming form over function. All the way down to, there's rumors that they had to put dots on the glass, on because the rumor was those were Jony Ive's tears. so
people kept hitting into the glass, and they would have to.
They kept on running into the glass.
You're talking about the curved windows at the Apple campus.
The doors in between them.
Doors. Okay.
The doors. People would just walk into them all the time, and so they had to put little dots across them to cover them up
because you wanted completely clear glass. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the thing is that I think that those are the. I think he wasn't knocking it out of the park. I mean, there was definitely things that were having, how it looks become more important than how it actually operates. And a lot of us were getting upset. I stopped buying the laptops.
Yeah.
And I'm a pretty ardent Apple user. And for me to say I'm going to stick with my 2016 laptop is a thing.
That's not covered in the book, which I thought was a big surprise. They don't cover the Mac, the keyboard, any of that. The watch is covered a lot. Some of the other stuff, the car.
Is
but not
this
the
really
Mac at all.
a book about Jony Ive? It sounds like more than Apple.
It alternates. So it's almost like, how Game of Thrones had point of view characters. You have like the Tim Cook point of view chapters, and then the Jony Ive point of view chapters, and some chapters cross in between, like a Star Wars movie finale when you're going from group to group, seeing how the different people are reacting.
Yeah, Clay Shirky reviews it for the New York Times. And says, in the epilogue, Mickle drops his reporter's detachment to apportion responsibility for the firm's failure to launch another transformative product. Cook is blamed for being aloof and unknowable, a bad partner for Ive, quote, an artist who wanted to bring empathy to every product, end quote. Ive is also dinged for taking on, quote, responsibility for software design and the management burdens that he soon came to disdain, end quote. By the end, the sense that the two missed a chance to create a worthy successor to the iPhone is palpable, and Shirky says it's also hooey. And the best evidence of this is the previous 400 pages. It's true that after Jobs died, Apple didn't produce another device as important as the iPhone, but Apple didn't produce another device that important before he died either.
And nobody else has.
The iPhone is such an outlier that anytime you compare anything to the iPhone, you're going to lose.
Well, and I do think
Apple
that
Watch and AirPods business is big. Sorry, Alex.
Yeah, I know, and I agree, and I think that I do think that eventually, someday in the future, we'll probably have an Apple Car, and we'll have, and then you have the whatever the glasses are going to be, whatever that turns out to be, and those will be slow cookers, like the way we see the watch. I don't think they're going to be a replacement for the iPhone, but I think that we're going to start seeing that pie chart where the iPhone is half continue to decrease. And that is may not be revolutionary, but it is super powerful as a company to be able to keep on maintaining your revenue and then continuing to diversify it into very different markets is something that very few companies do well. And maybe Apple won't do it well either. But I think that we're on a trajectory of 3 to 5 years from now, nothing being more than 30% of the revenue. And that puts them in a much different place, especially when you start talking about antitrust and you talk about other things. They're like, well, we might lose a little bit of something on the iPhone, but we've got all these other things to, that are doing well. So I think what I will say is that Cook has brought. I think he has taken some of the excitement out of it, but he's brought a level of management, that is why Apple keeps growing. It's
Pixar under Disney.
I think it felt to me, and again, I haven't read the book. I look forward to it. It felt to me that Ive was singularly happy under Steve Jobs and didn't like Tim Cook's style. Well, that happens all the time. They're very different stylistically. Tim Cook
They both miss Steve enormously.
Yeah.
Both Tim and
But
Jony.
Tim has made Apple even more successful, to be honest.
Like
So-
Steve was so decisive, and he was normally he'd make big blunders too. Like, and Jony said that he had like big dopey ideas sometimes, but he was really good at, like, you'd present him something, he'd say use that one, and he was mostly right. And Jony couldn't do that on his own, and Tim was like waiting for people to do that on their own, and that led to a lot of tension. He does cover Apple's rise to services, though, especially how Tim Cook managed to get Wall Street off his back by going all in on services. Now that ramped up the price to earning ratio considerably because Wall Street appreciates services business. And to Alex's point, that's now such a huge contributor towards Apple's bottom line.
Well, and also the fact that, I don't think I don't think they never ever did a dividend, any kind of stock buyback or I think Steve like really felt like you were lucky to be on the train with him. Like, you can,
you're not going to get
charity, philanthropy, any of that. He didn't believe
all
in.
that stuff was, so he just believed his job was to do that.
It looks to me like, and again, I haven't read the book, so you correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a lot of great information in this book, that where Mickle might have gone wrong is trying to build a narrative around what is essentially kind of a random walk with different people bouncing off of each other. And why hasn't Apple had another iPhone? Well, it's hard to say this is why. So he's
just
trying to
a little
make a
two-dimensional.
He's trying to make a narrative out of it that doesn't really fit the facts. But the facts
it's just
are
a bit
good,
2D.
right? Yeah, it's 2D.
Yeah, I mean, the stories are really good, but it's very it's too. Well, it depends on how much you know Apple. Like, if you don't know Apple at all, it'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe all this is happening. It's such drama. This would be a soap opera. This is what was going on. But when you know Apple, it's like, yes, but if you had to do all that stuff, that was really hard to do.
We had the same complaints about Isaacson's books, about his biography of Steve Jobs, that it was fine if you were not, as we are, buried in Apple trivia. But the people who really had been following this all along felt like it was a little bit of an outsider's perspective.
There's a great story. There's one great story where he's like so angry. Jony Ive is so angry that he makes these beautiful super ellipses where the curves are so gradual. And Scott Forstall keeps planting these ridiculous round recs with just like curved corners on the phone, and they don't match. And it makes him crazier and crazier. And finally he gets rid of Scott and takes over. But then he's like, I didn't want to take over. I just wanted to fix those rectangles.
Yeah.
I just wanted to go in there and say, do this, but I didn't want to have to manage them all.
It's pretty clear that Jony did not really relish this role that he was put into of managing.
Yeah, wanted the power, but not the management.
Wanted the power, but not the job.
And to get back to, this is the challenge with any book that's written is that if you're writing from the outside, and this is every piece of press that we watch, when you're dealing with people who are, this is one story for this week and another story for next week,
right?
They're inherently going to be inaccurate and inherently miss the thread because they don't know it that well. They don't, and that's, anytime someone reports about anything that I'm working on, people report, I quietly work on a lot of things and people report on a lot of things that I work on. And I find it humorous to watch their version of what I worked on because it's not.
It's always true.
It's always true. And so in his defense,
when you read a story in the newspaper about something you intimately know, it never.
Yeah, you're just
chives.
like, wow.
It's that amnesia, right? I forget what it's called. Something mall amnesia, where you read the article that you know, and then you think it's all wrong. Then you read an article of something you don't know, and you just assume it's all right.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Well, that's life. I mean,
Yep.
Tripp. I don't know anything about Tripp's job either. Right.
Right. Exactly.
So that's the way it is. We all are trying to see the world. We see it through our point of view, but trying to see it through others' point of view is always
Gelman amnesia. That's what it's called.
Gelman amnesia. That's right.
Yeah.
From Murray Gelman. All right. So it's worth reading, though. It's a good book.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think it's fun.
Like a lot. Again, it's not perfect, but like a lot of stuff you would just never know otherwise.
Right.